This is week 179 of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I'm Belokur, reporting to you from Kyiv, and I'll be taking you through the top stories from Ukraine this week. The Ukrainian parliament voted on Thursday to overturn last week's controversial law that effectively stripped Ukraine's anti-corruption agencies of their independence. The vote for the reversal was expected to come down to the wire, given that the previous law passed by a majority. With a baseline of 226 lawmakers' votes needed to approve the reversal, it was a relief when it was announced midday on Thursday that 331 lawmakers had voted in favor of doing so, and none had voted against. The voting was the first live-streamed parliamentary event since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, and followed more than a week of street rallies across the country. People gathered outside of Parliament on Thursday morning in anticipation of the vote, and cheers followed the announcement that the new law had passed.
Це, прежде всього, я прийшла сюди, щоб відстоювати європейський курс України. Я хочу, щоб ми нарешті вступили в ЄС, а не були якоюсь окраїною Росії.
Що відчули, коли законопроект проголосували і вже стало зрозуміло, що далі тільки президентський підпис?
Ну, раді, звичайно, бо тому що ми стояли там біля, там вже виводили, нам показували демонстрацію з ЕТР з Верховної Ради.
To recap briefly from last week, the first law, the joint work of President Zelensky and Parliament, brought two key Ukrainian anti-corruption agencies, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau and the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, under the control of the Prosecutor General, a government position that is nominated by the President and has no guarantee of impartiality. This law allowed the government control over which anti-corruption cases were permitted to be investigated and which could be quashed, a far more authoritarian setup than the one Ukraine has fought for in the decade since the Euromaidan revolution. The law was met with strong pushback by the Ukrainian people in the form of these protests, as well as pressure from EU leadership, as the move undermined Ukraine's path to EU membership. This week's new law restores independence to the agencies, effectively reversing the events of last week, although the public's memory certainly can't be erased. It remains to be seen how existing investigations will proceed against people close to Zelensky, like controversial ex-minister Alexei Chernyshov, or whether the organizers and participants of the protests themselves will face increased pressure from the government, including independent media who covered the event. While this week's reversal is undoubtedly a win for democracy, the government's next steps must be watched carefully. Independence has a special meaning to us. That's why it's in our name. Independent media is crucial to a functioning democracy, a role that we take very seriously. We're a reader-funded news outlet, meaning that shows like this are only made possible by viewers like you. If you'd like to join our community of more than 20,000 members, there will be a link to our membership page in the description below. I'd also like to thank everyone who donates directly via YouTube. Your support is greatly appreciated. U.S. President Donald Trump seems to be finally losing patience with Russia and its leader. On Tuesday, Trump announced that he would be shortening his 50-day deadline for Russia to make a peace deal with Ukraine or risk severe secondary tariffs, after saying the day before that he already knew Vladimir Putin's answer on the matter, implying that he didn't expect Putin's compliance or any forward motion within the set timeframe. Trump's original 50-day announcement was made on July 14th, meaning that Putin's deadline for moving towards peace would be the beginning of September. But under the new deadline, secondary tariffs will now be imposed by the end of this week if no progress is made. Trump even went so far as to announce on Truth Social that 25% secondary tariffs against India would be imposed on August 1st, in retaliation for buying Russian oil. Amid the deadline being pushed up, Trump expressed disappointment with Putin, telling UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer that Putin is pleasant in conversation, but then turns around and kills Ukrainians immediately after. When asked about Trump's reasoning for moving up the deadline, U.S. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce said that the president was frustrated with his patience being misinterpreted. So, how did the Kremlin react to the deadline being pushed up? Deputy Chairman of the Security Council of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, stated earlier this week that Trump's ultimatum game with Moscow amounts to threatening Russia and increases the odds of America being pulled into a direct war. Trump responded on Thursday that Medvedev should watch his words because he's entering dangerous territory. Medvedev has a history of making extreme statements that often amount to little, so I'd take his threats with a grain of salt. But the bottom line is that Trump's tone towards Russia is growing increasingly hostile and non-negotiable by the day. It should be noted that amid the back and forth, Russia did indeed continue killing Ukrainians. In the early hours of Thursday, we woke up to drone and missile explosions here in Kyiv. There had been severe storms in the previous days, so some of us, myself included, were blissfully unaware of the actual danger after days of talking ourselves down from the sound of thunder. Others weren't so lucky. At least 31 people were killed, including 5 children, and more than 150 were injured.
This is the Kyiv Independent reporting from attack site in Kyiv, and we talked to a lot of people who were living in these apartments that were damaged or hit.
Тривога почалася, і буквально за 2 хвилини почувся такий удар. Я навіть не почув, як воно летить. У мене просто, воно збило з ніг. Я впав на підлогу. Повезло, що оце вікно мене не прибило. Бо якщо прибило, я думаю, я тут живих не був би. І все, і вибіжав на двор. Там же ж багато і людей ще залишилось під завалами. Да. Там є мої друзі, на жаль. Да.
Вже не було чим дихати у квартирі, воно шпиль там. І нічого не видно, нічого, ні дихати, ні бачити, нічого. Ми бігом, нас перетягли через балкон, хлопці посаджували нас. Та і все на вулиці. Стоїмо, ждемо. А що ми ждемо? Ми що дождемося, чи живі мої діти, чи ні? Не знаю. Мені дітей жалко. Внуки моїх, я ж їх виростила, і нічого.
A column published in Russian state media on Wednesday, hours before the strike, referred to Ukrainians as lab rats, to Ukraine as a training ground for the West, and claimed that there is no choice but to leave no one alive in Ukraine. This gives you an idea of where the Russian government's head is at a week before Trump's deadline. What their reaction will be if next week's events do indeed deal a huge blow to the Russian economy is anyone's guess. But Ukrainians are waiting anxiously. Amid all of this, Ukraine dealt several huge blows to Russia this week. Literally. The annual Navy Day parade that was set to take place in St. Petersburg last Sunday was canceled for the first time ever amid the threat of Ukrainian strikes, after nearly 100 Ukrainian drones were downed across western Russia the night before. This was followed by 2 days of Russia canceling the flights of its largest airline, Aeroflot, due to Ukrainian cyber attacks on the company's IT infrastructure. Given the frequency with which Aeroflot planes crash from malfunctions, there is a joke to be made here about Ukraine saving lives. On Thursday, 11 explosions were reported at a radio manufacturing plant in Penza, a Russian city roughly 600 kilometers from Ukrainian-controlled territory. This plant is reported to manufacture equipment for mobile command units, automated combat control systems, and military-grade radio stations. Thursday also saw strikes on energy infrastructure in Russia's Volgograd Oblast. On the battlefield, Ukraine refutes Russia's claim that it has captured Chasiv Yar in Donetsk Oblast, a long-embattled city a few kilometers west of Russian-occupied Bakhmut. As of this week, the monitoring group Deep State Map reports that Ukraine continues to hold the south and western parts of Chasiv Yar, although analysts say that Russia does likely occupy a majority of the city. I've been talking about the threat of Russia fully occupying Chasiv Yar since last summer, which speaks to how fiercely Ukraine has been working to hold the line over many months. The city, which used to be home to 12,000 people, is reduced to skeletal ruins from intense urban combat, but its full occupation would be advantageous to Russia for several reasons. It's on high ground, giving a vantage point to the surrounding area, and it's a key roadblock for Russia in moving on towards the last Ukrainian strongholds in Donetsk Oblast. Russia has made no secret that it wants the entirety of Donetsk Oblast. It's one of their unrelenting demands in peace talks. And with the Russian summer offensive underway, Putin seems willing to expend as many lives as needed to keep inching forward towards that goal. We have one last segment that's a little bit odd. On Monday night, a colleague forwarded me a video from a Twitter account called MAGA Finest, with a caption that read, "The Kyiv Independent reports that Zelensky has imposed sanctions against," followed by a list of prominent Republicans. This video, which showed a muted version of one of President Zelensky's nightly addresses, had our logo on it and was cropped in the usual framing that we use for videos on social media. The problem is that we had made no such video, and the information in it was completely fake. Zelensky hasn't been sanctioning Republicans, and there were some mistakes in the branding, from the logo to the font of the subtitles, that showed it wasn't our work. But to the untrained eye glancing at it briefly, it was a relatively convincing fake. So, fake videos, whether they're AI-generated deepfakes or fabricated news reports that are imitating the branding of legitimate media outlets, are a common tactic of Russian propaganda channels. These videos aid in campaigns to spread misinformation among Westerners who don't realize it's fake. If an elderly person in the UK sees a video making radical claims, but there's a BBC logo on it, they might believe it and spread it in their circle without questioning whether it actually originated from the BBC. So, some basic tips for identifying fake news videos are: ask whether the visual matches the story exactly. Is this a video of the event in question, or stock footage of a different event being reused out of context, or several different events mashed together to appear like one? Is it being muted, sped up, or slowed down, or looped? Does the sound match the video, or does it sound altered in some way? If the video is shared by a source other than the official account of the outlet, and the information in it seems radical or shocking, ask whether the branding on the video could be recreated using basic editing tools. Logos can be copied and added by anyone using only a cell phone, but things like custom fonts or exact templates are harder to mimic, and often there will be subtle differences that signal a different author. These channels usually aren't striving for perfect copies, when sloppy ones can still do a lot of damage. All of that being said, the best way to avoid fake videos is to get your news directly from sources that you trust, rather than scrolling an algorithm that's programmed to boost rage bait. I'm grateful to everyone who tunes into this show every week. Thank you for your trust.
Today's member question comes from Berger. I'm still a bit mystified regarding the anti-corruption activity. There was huge support in the Rada immediately after Zelensky introduced a bill reviewing what he just supported. The initial bill was rushed through the parliament by controversial lawmakers from Zelensky's party last week. And a source in the Ukrainian parliament told me earlier this week that lawmakers had little time to review the bill. In general, they didn't understand all the details that were inside the bill, and but they were told by somebody that this bill had a full support from the president. Some lawmakers, they were allegedly misled when they voted for the bill, while others were just happy since they themselves face criminal investigations. Zelensky signed the bill and later saying that it was meant to combat alleged Russian influence within the anti-corruption bodies. But according to media reports, these two anti-corruption bodies were preparing charges against people from Zelensky's inner circle. So stripping these two anti-corruption institutions from the independence would mean that these people close to Zelensky could avoid the prosecution in the future. It seems that Zelensky and his team assumed that this move would go unnoticed, but they miscalculated. And Ukrainians took to the streets for the first anti-government protest in the beginning of the full-scale war. Under this pressure and pressure from European partners, Zelensky proposed a new bill that restored the independence of the two anti-corruption agencies. But in general, this episode triggered a shift, I think, because Ukrainians now would be more willing to criticize the government and hold it accountable.
That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. If you enjoyed this video, as much as anyone can enjoy this kind of news, please consider becoming a member of the Kyiv Independent community. It's thanks to viewers like you that we can do this work, and we're so grateful for your support. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.